The war had raged for centuries. Across countless planets, among the ruins of once thriving civilizations, the struggle continued. Two of the most advanced species in the known galaxy had been locked in conflict for so long that neither side remembered who struck first. Their war machines had burned entire worlds to ash. Their fleets had reduced moons to drifting debris fields, and their soldiers had perished by the trillions. And yet, neither side could claim victory. One faction prided itself on superior strategy and coordination, their minds functioning like living supercomputers. Every move they made was calculated to the finest detail, every battle waged with ruthless efficiency. The other faction was built for war, biologically engineered for destruction, their bodies hardened against weapons, their instincts honed over millennia of bloodshed. One side thought its way through war, the other tore through it with brute force. And so the war dragged on. For every planet won, another was lost. For every fleet destroyed, another took its place. Hope had long faded, replaced only by the endless churn of destruction. Then humanity arrived. It had been mere months since their first encounter with the greater galactic community. The larger empires barely acknowledged them, just another young, insignificant species clinging to their homeworld, boasting of their technological advancements while still struggling with their own primitive conflicts. And yet, when the humans learned of the war that had raged for centuries, they did something no one expected. They volunteered to end it. No one took their offer seriously. The war had outlived entire civilizations, shattered empires, and rewritten the balance of the galaxy. What could this upstart species possibly do that billions of others had not? The answer came 5 hours after the humans entered the war. It started with the arrival of a single fleet, smaller than the armadas both warring factions routinely deployed. No great spectacle, no announcement, just an entry into the contested sector where the latest battle was raging. The commanders of the warring factions barely took notice. They were too focused on their own struggle, too deep in their centuries-old hatred. Then, their ships started disappearing. At first, it seemed like a sensor malfunction. A battlecruiser, one of the largest in the sector, simply ceased to exist on the scanners. A moment later, another ship was gone. No explosion, no energy signature, just erased from reality. Panic rippled through the battlefield. The warring factions had fought for so long that they had seen nearly every tactic imaginable. But this was something else. Even their most advanced technology could not explain what was happening. Then the humans sent a message. "Lay down your weapons. The war ends now." The message was ignored. The factions would not surrender to an enemy they could not even see. So the humans continued. Entire fleets vanished in an instant. Military outposts crumbled without a single shot fired. Weapons systems turned against their own ships. Defensive barriers collapsed, as if they had never existed. The war that had lasted for centuries, one that had survived every strategy, every escalation, and every desperate attempt at resolution, was being dismantled in real time. Desperation took hold. One faction launched every superweapon in their arsenal, filling the void of space with enough firepower to destroy entire planets. The humans didn't even dodge. The weapons simply failed. The energy dispersed harmlessly. Missiles vanished mid-flight. Reality itself seemed to reject the idea that these weapons could harm the newcomers. It was then that both factions understood. They were not fighting a war anymore. They were being corrected. Another message came through. "Last chance. Surrender, or we finish this the hard way." Within the hour, the war ended. A conflict that had outlasted civilizations, that had cost more lives than could be counted, that had become the defining struggle of an entire region of the galaxy. Over. Just like that. The galactic community reeled. Some watched in terror, others in awe. But one thing was clear. Humanity was not just another species. They were something else entirely. And now the galaxy had to ask itself a question. What happens when an unstoppable war machine finally has peace? Because if humans could end a war in 5 hours, what else were they capable of? The silence that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. For the first time in centuries, there were no battle reports flooding the communication networks, no distress calls from the front lines, no desperate strategists scrambling to turn the tide. The war was over. The factions that had been at each other's throats for generations now sat in stunned disbelief. And at the center of it all stood humanity. The leaders of both factions, once sworn enemies, now found themselves in the same position, on the receiving end of something they had never known before: absolute defeat. Aboard a human command vessel, representatives from both sides were seated at a long table, their eyes locked onto the single human standing before them. She was no warrior, no battle-hardened general. She wore no armor, carried no weapons. And yet, she radiated something far more terrifying than any battlefield commander they had ever faced: confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm, almost casual, "shall we discuss the terms?" One of the representatives, still too shaken to compose himself, slammed a clawed hand onto the table. "This is impossible. You did something. We demand to know what." She smiled. "Of course. You see, for centuries you've been fighting the same war, using the same strategies, the same weapons, the same thinking. You adjusted, adapted, but you never truly evolved. You were trapped in an endless loop, a self-sustaining conflict where neither side could win. And then," she gestured at herself, "we showed up." Another representative, from the other faction, narrowed his many eyes. "You tampered with our systems. You used some kind of forbidden technology. Our fleets vanished without a trace." "Ah," the woman said, as if mildly amused. "You're assuming we use technology beyond your understanding. That's adorable." The room fell into an uneasy silence. One of the faction leaders, a towering figure clad in ceremonial armor, leaned forward. "Then what did you do?" She exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to tell them the truth. "Simple," she said. "We outthought you." The war-hardened leaders exchanged glances. "You have your strategies, your carefully planned maneuvers, your centuries of tactics refined and perfected, but you never accounted for us." She stepped forward, placing her hands on the table. "You've seen what we did in 5 hours. Do you really want to know what we could do in 5 days?" There was no response. "Now," she continued, leaning back, "here's how this is going to go. You're going to sign a peace treaty. No more war, no more skirmishes, no more accidents. You will never raise a weapon against each other again." She paused, her expression hardening. "Or against us." The room felt colder. "And if we refuse?" one of the leaders asked, though his voice lacked the defiance it should have had. The woman gave a slow, almost pitying smile. "Then you'll simply cease to exist." She didn't say it as a threat. She didn't have to. It was a statement of fact. The war had raged for centuries. Humanity had ended it in 5 hours. No one doubted for a second that they could erase both factions just as easily. The decision was made before the meeting had even ended. The war that had shaped the course of history, the conflict that had defined an entire region of the galaxy, was over. And humanity? They walked away as if it had all been business as usual. The galaxy had changed that day. The balance of power had shifted. Because now everyone had to ask themselves the same question. What happens when the humans decide they don't like something? In the days that followed, the galaxy stood on edge. The war that had raged for centuries was gone, wiped away in a mere 5 hours by a species that most had dismissed as insignificant. And now, the surviving factions were left with the unsettling reality of what had happened. They had not been outgunned, they had not been outnumbered, they had been outmatched in every way. For the first time in their long history, they were afraid. The defeated factions had signed the peace treaty without protest, knowing full well that resistance was futile. The document had been drafted by humanity, written in clear, simple terms that left no room for misinterpretation. There would be no more war, no more hostilities, no attempts to rebuild what had been lost. And above all else, no one would challenge humanity. The leaders of the galaxy's greatest powers convened in a secret meeting, far from prying human eyes. They had to understand how. How had the humans achieved this? What had they done to render two of the most warlike species completely powerless? They must have discovered some forbidden technology, one leader speculated. Something beyond our comprehension. That doesn't make sense, another argued. If they had that kind of power, why not conquer us all? A chilling thought settled over the room. They didn't need to. A species that could dismantle an entire war in 5 hours had no need for conquest. They didn't rule through force. They ruled through fear. For the first time, the galactic elite realized that humanity was something different, something dangerous. They had been allowed to exist. But the real question was, why? The answer came sooner than expected. A transmission from Earth arrived, not with threats, not with demands, but with something far stranger. An invitation. Humanity had called for a summit. Every major civilization, every faction, every species with influence was invited to Earth itself to discuss the future of the galaxy. No one refused. They couldn't. The meeting was held in a massive structure humans called the United Nations headquarters, a building that had once served as a hub for diplomacy among their own people. Now, it would serve as the first true gathering of galactic powers under human oversight. The leaders arrived, their ships hovering over a planet that, to the outside eye, looked painfully ordinary. No grand defense stations, no massive space fleets, no signs of the overwhelming power they had witnessed. And yet, none dared test humanity's patience. Inside the summit hall, the human representatives greeted each leader personally. No armed guards, no security measures, just humans, shaking hands and smiling as if they had not just rewritten the course of galactic history. When the meeting began, the same human woman who had dictated the peace terms stood at the center. "Welcome to Earth," she said simply. The alien leaders exchanged uneasy glances. "We know what you're all thinking," she continued. "You're afraid. You're wondering what we really are, what we really want." Silence. She smiled. "Good. You should be afraid." Murmurs of unease spread across the room. "You've ruled this galaxy for millennia, waging wars, building empires, crushing those who stood in your way. And in 5 hours, we proved that your power means nothing, that your greatest conflicts are just problems waiting to be solved." She let that hang in the air before continuing. "We could have destroyed you. We could have rewritten the galaxy in our image, but we didn't." She leaned forward, eyes scanning the room. "Do you know why?" No one spoke. "Because we don't need to." A soft chuckle escaped her lips. "You see, humans aren't conquerors. We're not tyrants. We're problem solvers. We take broken things and fix them. And your galaxy? It's very, very broken." One of the leaders found their voice. "Then what do you want?" The woman tilted her head. "We want you to evolve." The room tensed. "For too long you've been stuck in the same cycle. War, destruction, rebuilding, repeat. You never change? You never move forward? You're stagnant." She spread her arms. "That ends today." Another leader scoffed. "And if we refuse?" The woman's smile faded. "Then we'll fix the problem ourselves." No one doubted her. The galaxy had always believed that power belonged to the strongest, the most advanced, the most ruthless. But humanity had changed the rules. They had rewritten the very foundation of what power meant. And now, for the first time in history, the future of the galaxy belonged to them. Because humanity had done in 5 hours what no empire had done in 1,000 years. They had won. The days following the summit were marked by an eerie silence across the galaxy. Every faction, every empire, every species capable of space travel found itself trapped in the same terrifying realization. Humanity was now in control, not through war, not through conquest, but because they had simply decided it was so, and no one dared challenge them. The former warring factions had retreated into uneasy compliance, their centuries of hatred suddenly meaningless. Other civilizations, once confident in their own strength, now found themselves questioning everything. What would happen if they became a problem? Humanity had ended an unstoppable war in 5 hours. What else could they do? The answer came faster than anyone expected. A minor skirmish broke out in the outer rim, far from the core worlds where the summit had taken place. It was nothing compared to the centuries-old war that had just ended, just a territorial dispute between 2 lesser factions. But the humans responded, not with diplomacy, not with threats, with absolute authority. A single human warship entered the system where the battle was taking place. It was tiny compared to the capital ships of the warring factions, barely the size of a cruiser. The 2 factions paid it no mind. Then, in the span of 10 minutes, every weapon in the system stopped working. Their engines failed. Their shields collapsed. Their communication systems went silent. No explosions, no visible attacks, no warnings. Everything just shut down. The human warship broadcast a single message across the system. "We are not asking." The battle ended before it had truly begun. The disabled ships were left drifting in space, helpless, until humanity allowed them to leave. The message was clear. War was no longer an option. And if anyone still doubted that, the humans soon made their stance even clearer. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful empires began receiving transmissions from Earth. They were instructions, not requests, not proposals, instructions. Humanity had analyzed the economies of every major civilization, mapped out inefficiencies, and sent detailed directives on how to correct them. Resources would be redistributed. Technologies would be shared. The weak would no longer be exploited. The suffering of lesser species would end. The empires were given precisely one standard cycle to comply. Most obeyed without question. A few hesitated. One refused. The Krivari Dominion, a notoriously cruel empire that had built its strength on slavery and conquest, sent an official response back to Earth. It was a declaration of defiance. They would not bow to humans. They would not follow orders from an upstart species barely a few thousand years into space travel. They had ruled for millennia. They had crushed rebellions, conquered entire star systems, and wiped out species that stood in their way. They were not afraid. But they should have been. Because 3 hours after their message was sent, the Krivari Dominion ceased to exist. No invasion, no drawn-out war, no grand human armada descending from the stars. Their empire simply collapsed. Their warships lost power and fell into the void. Their planetary defenses failed, leaving them exposed. Their leadership vanished without a trace. No one knew how the humans had done it. No one dared ask. The lesson was clear. Humanity was finished giving warnings. From that day forward, the galaxy changed. Not through war, not through treaties, but because humanity had decided how things would be, and the universe obeyed. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy was at peace. Not the uneasy, temporary ceasefires that had defined past generations, not the fragile treaties, riddled with loopholes and ulterior motives. This was something absolute. Wars did not break out. Star systems did not burn. No species raised a weapon against another. Because everyone understood the new reality. Humanity was watching. And they did not tolerate disorder. The collapse of the Krivari Dominion had been the final warning. No one knew exactly what had happened to them, but the fear it spread was undeniable. Their homeworld, once a thriving capital of conquest, was now a ghost planet. No bodies, no signs of battle. Just empty cities and silent streets. Their entire ruling class had vanished overnight, leaving nothing behind but whispers of a force that could not be stopped, reasoned with, or resisted. The galaxy had never known fear like this before. But as the months passed, a realization settled in. It was working. Crime across the galaxy had plummeted to near zero. The once warring factions, bound by humanity's unbreakable decree, found themselves forced into cooperation. The weak no longer suffered under the heel of the powerful. The corrupt could no longer exploit the helpless. Humanity was not just enforcing peace. They were fixing the galaxy. It became clear that their control went beyond just military power. Their influence seeped into every aspect of civilization. Trade routes were optimized. Food production was increased through superior agricultural technology. Medical advancements eradicated diseases that had plagued entire species for millennia. And no one could stop them. Not because they lacked the strength, but because, for the first time ever, no one wanted to. The galaxy was thriving. Even those who had once feared humanity now depended on them, and that terrified them more than anything, because they all knew a simple, undeniable truth. They had no control anymore. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy with war. They had done it with competence, and now the entire universe belonged to them. But in the quiet corners of the galaxy, beyond the reach of human observation, something else was beginning to stir. A question that had been growing in whispered conversations. A question that no one dared ask out loud. If humans could erase empires in hours, if they could impose peace upon the universe without resistance, then what happens when humanity decides they no longer want peace? Because if they could end a war in 5 hours, then what could they do in 5 minutes? The galaxy had never known true order until now. For the first time, planets flourished without fear of invasion. Empires that had once relied on war to expand now found themselves forced into prosperity through cooperation. Even species that had spent centuries as bitter enemies were now bound by humanity's decree. And yet, unease remained. Because while the galaxy thrived under human rule, no one understood them. They weren't conquerors. They weren't tyrants. They were something else entirely. And that terrified everyone. It had been months since the last act of defiance, the Krivari Dominion's disappearance. Since then, no one had challenged humanity. No one dared. But in the darkness of space, beyond the systems humans monitored, a plan was forming. A meeting was held in secret, deep within the ruins of an abandoned moon. Representatives from the galaxy's oldest and most powerful factions gathered in the shadows. They had once been enemies, locked in wars that had lasted for millennia. But today, they had only one enemy. The humans. "We've waited too long," one of them growled, slamming a fist against the table. "Every day they tighten their grip. If we don't act now, we never will." "And what do you propose?" another asked. "Their technology is beyond us. Their strategies defy logic. You saw what happened to the Krivari. They were erased like they never existed." A murmur of unease spread through the room. The Krivari had been powerful. Their fleets had conquered entire sectors with ease. And yet, against the humans, they had lasted only 3 hours before vanishing into nothingness. One of the figures at the table leaned forward. "We've been thinking about this all wrong," she said. "We keep trying to fight them. But what if war isn't the answer?" Silence. She continued, her voice measured. "Humans are not warriors, not in the way we understand. They didn't crush us with fleets. They didn't invade. They changed the game itself. So we need to stop thinking like soldiers." Her eyes gleamed in the dim light. "And start thinking like saboteurs." A ripple of understanding spread through the room. They couldn't fight the humans, but they could break them. Slowly, quietly, from within. It began as a whisper in the shadows, a movement that no one acknowledged out loud. But as the weeks passed, it spread. Doubt, suspicion, mistrust. For so long, the galaxy had feared humanity's power. But now a far more dangerous idea took root. What if humans weren't as invincible as they seemed? What if, beneath all their confidence, all their impossible victories, they had a weakness, and once they found it, they would burn the humans to the ground? It started subtly. Humanity had not ruled through fear alone. They had ruled through order. They had fixed what was broken. They had optimized trade, stabilized economies, and eliminated war. And so the first blow wasn't aimed at their fleets or their technology. It was aimed at their systems. Supply routes that had functioned with machine-like precision suddenly faltered. Resources disappeared. Trade agreements that had once been honored without question now fell into dispute. At first, it seemed like a coincidence, a natural fluctuation in a vast, complex galactic network. Then, entire colonies reported famine. Vital shipments simply never arrived. Starving populations, who had come to depend on humanity's perfect logistical control, suddenly found themselves abandoned. And then came the accusations. The whispers started in distant sectors, among those who had always viewed human control with suspicion. The humans are doing this on purpose. They built this system to fail. This was their plan all along, to weaken us, to make us dependent, and now they're letting us starve to remind us who's in charge. The unrest spread like wildfire. Planets that had once embraced human leadership rebelled, not with weapons, but with dissent. Civil unrest erupted across multiple systems. Leaders who had once praised humanity now condemned them, claiming that their rule had brought nothing but a new kind of slavery. And humanity? For the first time since they had taken control, they hesitated. Because this wasn't a war they could end in 5 hours. This was distrust, and no weapon in their arsenal could stop it. The rebellion reached its peak when an entire human diplomatic vessel vanished while en route to a peace summit. No distress signal, no wreckage, just gone. For the first time, humanity was on the defensive. For the first time, they didn't have control. In the heart of Earth's most secure command center, the highest-ranking officials of humanity gathered in silence. They had solved war, they had solved poverty, they had solved crime, but they had never accounted for one thing. What happens when the very people they tried to save turn against them? And as the galaxy teetered on the brink of chaos once more, one terrifying question remained unanswered. How will humanity respond when it finally feels threatened? The air in the human command center was tense. For the first time since humanity had reshaped the galaxy, they were losing control. The rebellion wasn't like anything they had encountered before. It wasn't a war they could end with superior technology or strategy. It was chaos, a creeping infection of doubt and anger spreading across worlds. And worse, it was working. Leaders who had once praised humanity now questioned them. Their own allies hesitated. The systems they had built, once flawless, now collapsed under mistrust. The supply failures, the lost resources, deliberate sabotage. Someone, somewhere, was playing a long game against humanity. But who? A group of analysts sat around a hollow table, examining every disrupted trade route, every missing ship, every sudden uprising. Their technology was advanced beyond any other species, yet the pattern eluded them. "We're dealing with something coordinated," one analyst said. "These failures are too precise, too widespread. Someone is feeding the galaxy a lie, and they're believing it." A voice cut through the room. "They don't need to believe a lie." The room turned to the woman who had once stood before the Galactic Summit, the one who had dictated peace to the universe with nothing but her presence. "They just need to doubt the truth," she continued. Her voice was cold, calculating. The analysts exchanged wary glances. There was something dangerous in the way she said it. For months, humanity had imposed peace through precision, logic, and efficiency. But this was different. This was emotional. And if there was one thing humanity did better than anyone else, it was war. She stepped forward, her hands resting on the holotable, eyes scanning the mess of information before her. "They want to play games?" she murmured. The room was silent. Her gaze lifted, meeting the eyes of every analyst, every strategist, every leader in the room. "Then let's remind them what happens when humanity stops playing nice." The response was swift. It began with a message, not a warning, not a demand, just a simple, undeniable statement, broadcast across every world in every system. "The galaxy is broken again. We are fixing it. Step aside." There was no negotiation, no diplomacy. Humanity had tried peace. Now they were going to end the problem. The first step? Rooting out the infection. Entire fleets, once held back by restraint, now moved without hesitation. Suspected saboteurs vanished overnight. Information networks, once filled with propaganda against humans, were purged. Not with force, but with something far more terrifying. Truth. The missing trade shipments? Traced. The sabotaged infrastructure? Repaired. And then came the exposures. One by one, the galaxy's most powerful factions watched in horror as the true orchestrators of the rebellion were unmasked. The secret cabal that had worked to turn the galaxy against humanity? Their names, locations, and every hidden conspiracy they had woven were broadcast across every system. Planets turned against them. Empires that had been manipulated into rebellion suddenly realized they had been played. And the ones responsible? Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But humanity wasn't done. Because this time they weren't just fixing the galaxy. They were redesigning it. And when humans decide to reshape something, they don't stop until it's perfect. The galaxy watched in silence as humanity erased its enemies. Not with weapons, not with war, but with cold, calculated inevitability. One by one, the architects of the rebellion fell. Their hidden operations exposed, their influence shattered, their allies abandoning them in fear. The factions that had conspired against humanity found themselves hunted, not by fleets or armies, but by something far worse. Truth. Humanity had mastered war, they had mastered strategy, but above all, they had mastered control. And now, they were correcting the galaxy. The final holdout of the rebellion, a hidden council of the most powerful conspirators, gathered on a remote world, desperate to salvage what little remained of their plan. "They're destroying everything," one of them spat. "We spent years planting distrust, years undermining them. How did they unravel it so fast? They didn't unravel it, another whispered, eyes wide with terror. They saw it coming. The room fell into a stunned silence. No one wanted to admit it, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity had played along. They had allowed the rebellion to spread, allowed the conspiracies to fester, until they had everything they needed. Then, they crushed it in a matter of days. One of the leaders slammed a fist onto the table. "We have to disappear. We have to cut all ties, scatter across the galaxy." The lights flickered. Every screen in the room hijacked at once. And then a face appeared. Not a soldier, not a machine. The human woman who had dictated peace, who had ended a war in 5 hours, who had rewritten the rules of the galaxy. She smiled. "Running won't help you," she said simply. The room erupted into chaos. Some reached for weapons, others scrambled for escape routes. But it was already too late. The doors slammed shut. Their ships went offline. Their weapons failed. And then, the woman on the screen spoke one last time. "We let you play your little game," she said, her voice calm. "Now it's over." The transmission cut out. And then, nothing. The rebellion's leader simply vanished. No screams, no destruction, no war, just silence. And when the galaxy woke up the next day, there was no sign the conspirators had ever existed. There were no explanations, no bodies, just a single message, broadcast across every world, every system, every empire. "The galaxy is stable now. Do not break it again." Humanity had won, and this time, there would be no second chances. The galaxy belonged to them, forever. For centuries, the galactic community had laughed at Earth, a backwater planet filled with fragile, primitive creatures who barely understood space travel. The Council of Dominion, a ruling body of the most powerful empires, didn't even bother acknowledging Earth as a real civilization. They were weak. They were unimportant. They were nothing. At least, that's what the galaxy believed. Then the Zarkari Empire made a mistake. A species known for its brutal conquest, the Zarkari had crushed hundreds of worlds, leaving only smoldering ruins and enslaved survivors in their wake. Their 6-limbed war beasts, standing twice the size of the average human, were bred for one purpose: destruction. Their fleets darkened the skies of entire planets, wiping out resistance in days. So when they turned their hungry eyes toward Earth, the Council barely reacted. "Let them take it," the Corvin ambassador had scoffed. "Humans are nothing but hairless apes. If the Zarkari want to waste their resources, let them." It was meant to be an easy invasion, a mere formality before another banner was raised under the Zarkari Empire. But the moment the first Zarkari ships entered the Sol system, something went wrong. The Zarkari command vessel, the unyielding Wrath, led the charge. Massive, bristling with weapons, and surrounded by a fleet of destroyers, it should have been an unstoppable force. Their warriors readied themselves for the slaughter, their tusks polished, their claws sharpened. They were prepared for battle. But they weren't prepared for what happened next. Within seconds of their arrival, a single transmission was sent to the Zarkari fleet. No human warships had even launched yet. No defenses had fired. The message was simple. "Turn around. You do not understand what you are about to awaken." The Zarkari commander scoffed. Arrogance was in their blood. They responded with their own message, filled with mockery and threats. Then they heard the laughter. It was human laughter, but something about it was wrong. Distorted. Layered. It came through their communication systems, even after they cut the line. It echoed inside their helmets, inside their ships, crawling under their exoskeletons like an infection. Their translator systems tried to analyze it, failed, tried again. The laughter twisted, deepened, and the words that followed weren't in any known human language. The sound came from everywhere, and then, one by one, systems began shutting down. The Zarkari scrambled to reboot controls. But every time they restored a function, another failed. Weapon systems were the first to go, shields next, and then the lights. Total darkness fell over the unyielding wrath. Only the emergency crimson glow remained, bathing the towering war beasts in eerie light. The Zarkari warriors, undefeated in battle, now felt something alien to them. Fear. Then came the whispering. At first they thought it was just their own crew. But the voices came from inside their helmets, speaking in their own language, words that made no sense, words that twisted their very thoughts. One warrior screamed, tore off his helmet. Another fell to his knees, clawing at his own eyes, shrieking about the ones that live in the dark. No one understood what he meant. The ship's sensors flickered back online for only a moment, long enough to detect something moving. Not ships, not missiles, something else, something impossible. They were inside the ship. The Zarkari had never seen a human yet. They had expected resistance, expected weapons, expected desperate screams for mercy. They had not expected this. The invasion had not yet begun, and already the Zarkari were losing. Panic spread like wildfire through the unyielding wrath. The Zarkari were warriors, conquerors, creatures forged in the fires of endless war. They had crushed entire civilizations without a second thought. Yet now, in the depths of their own flagship, they trembled. The whispers slithered through their helmets, through their armor, through their very minds. Words that made no sense. Words that felt wrong. They are watching. You should have turned back. Now it's too late. The ship's commander, Overlord Garen, slammed his clawed fist onto the control panel, trying to re-establish order. Enough of this, he roared. Get the lights back on. Find the source of these signals and shut them down. His engineers scrambled to obey, but every system they tried to restore flickered and died. As if something was inside the ship, tearing it apart from the inside out. The transmission from Earth came again. This time it wasn't a warning. It was a question. Do you know what your predecessors did? The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. Predecessors? What predecessors? The Zarkari had never encountered humans before. As far as they knew, Earth was a new target, an easy conquest. Overlord Garen sneered and barked back a response. We do not care. Your species will kneel before us or burn. The laughter returned. But this time it wasn't just distorted audio. This time, the laughter came from behind them. One of the bridge officers turned, his mandibles clicking nervously. His eyes widened. His entire body froze in place. Oh, Overlord! Garen spun around. There was something standing at the back of the bridge. Not human. Not alien. A shadow. A thing with no face. Yet it felt like it was grinning. It towered over them, stretching unnaturally tall, its form flickering like static on a broken screen. The bridge officers grabbed their weapons and fired. Plasma rounds sliced through the air, passed right through the figure, and impacted the walls behind it. The shadow didn't react. Then it took a step forward. The nearest officer dropped his weapon and fell to the ground, convulsing. His eyes rolled back, his breathing slowed. Then, without a sound, he stopped moving. Dead. Garen felt his instincts scream at him to run. But he was a Zarkari warlord. He did not run. With a snarl, he barked orders. Get me a boarding crew. If these humans have some kind of psionic trick, we'll rip their skulls from their... The ship tilted. Not because of a weapon strike. Not because of an external force. But because something was pulling them. Overlord! One of the engineers shrieked. We're moving toward Earth's surface. Our thrusters aren't responding. Garen slammed his claws onto the control panel. "Fire the reverse boosters." "We can't. Everything is offline." The ship accelerated. Through the massive viewport, Earth loomed larger and larger, its blue surface now glowing with a strange, eerie light. And in orbit, just outside the planet's atmosphere, there were wrecks. Hundreds of them. Zarkari warships, Dominion vessels, remnants of fleets long thought missing, silent, abandoned husks floating in eternal orbit around Earth like a graveyard. Garen's eyes widened, his mandibles twitched. The realization finally dawned. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to invade Earth, and no one had ever returned. Then, just as the ship's hull began to tremble from atmospheric entry, the whispers returned one last time. "You were warned." The ship plummeted, and Earth finally opened its jaws. The Zarkari warships screamed through Earth's atmosphere, their hulls burning as they fought against the invisible force dragging them down. The unyielding wrath, once a symbol of unstoppable conquest, now plummeted like a wounded beast. Alarms shrieked across the ship. Warriors clung to anything they could find as the world outside spun in a blur of fire and chaos. Overlord Garen roared above the noise. "Brace for impact!" Then everything shattered. The flagship slammed into the surface, metal shrieking as it carved a mile-long trench into the earth. Smoke and flame rose from the wreckage, the once mighty vessel now nothing more than a broken husk. Smaller Zarkari ships crashed around it, some detonating on impact, others vanishing mid-air as if they had simply ceased to exist. Yet, despite the devastation, Garen was still alive. Pain racked his body as he pulled himself from the debris. His vision blurred, his ears rang. Around him, Zarkari warriors groaned and stumbled from the wreckage, some barely clinging to life, others crushed beneath the ruined metal. But something was wrong. It wasn't just the crash. It was the silence. There was no resistance waiting for them, no human army surrounding the wreck, no aircraft bombing their position, no sign that Earth's defenders even acknowledged their arrival. And yet, the air felt heavy, like something was watching. Garen staggered forward, his claws digging into the dirt. He activated his communicator. "Command, this is Overlord Garen. We have crashed, but we are still operational, requesting immediate extraction." Static. He tried again. "Command, respond." Only the same sound came back, but buried within the static, deep and distant, was breathing. Slow, measured, listening. Then, a voice. "You should not have come here." Garen's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't human. It wasn't Zarkari. It was something else. Then one of his warriors screamed. Garen spun toward the sound. A soldier, massive and battle-hardened, had collapsed to his knees. His armor, built to withstand the harshest conditions in the galaxy, was melting. No, rotting. His exoskeleton beneath it decayed in real time, flesh sloughing from bone, mandibles disintegrating into black dust. And then he was gone. Not dead. Not even a corpse remaining. Just gone. The other Zarkari recoiled, their warrior instincts warring with something primal inside them. Fear. What is this?" one of them snarled. Then they heard the footsteps. Not human, not alien, just footsteps coming from the wreckage, from the shadows, from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then came the laughter. The same laughter from the ship. Warped, endless, wrong. Shapes moved in the darkness, and for the first time in his life, Overlord Garen felt true terror because he finally understood. This planet was not weak. It was never weak. It was a trap. And they had walked straight into it. The Zarkari, the galaxy's most feared conquerors, had never known a true enemy. They had faced resistance before, but resistance was predictable. Soldiers, weapons, defenses, nothing they couldn't crush. But this was something else. Overlord Garen stood frozen, his claws twitching over the handle of his plasma blade. Around him, his warriors fanned out, weapons raised, scanning the smoke-filled battlefield. Wreckage littered the ground, fires flickered against the night sky, and the air was thick with the scent of burning metal. But there were no human soldiers, no incoming airstrikes, just shadows and whispers. "You are not the first." The voice slithered through the comms, the air inside their heads. Some warriors ripped their helmets off, desperate to escape the sound. But there was no escape. A soldier beside Garen twitched. He staggered, dropping his rifle, claws digging into his own skull as his breathing turned ragged. His mandibles clicked erratically, eyes unfocused. "Overlord," the warrior rasped. "I hear them! Inside! His body convulsed. Then, without warning, his head snapped backward at an impossible angle. A sickening crunch echoed through the battlefield. He dropped, lifeless. Garen's throat tightened. "Spread out! Stay alert!" The remaining warriors obeyed, forming defensive positions around the wreckage. Their plasma rifles glowed in the darkness, scanning for any sign of movement. Then, one of them fired. A bright bolt of energy streaked into the smoke. The impact lit up the battlefield for a fraction of a second, revealing nothing. No enemy. No figure. But the soldier who fired? His body jerked violently. He was yanked backward, dragged into the shadows by an unseen force. His screams lasted only a heartbeat before being silenced. The warriors panicked. They fired into the darkness, plasma bolts scorching the landscape, but hitting nothing. The air thickened. The ground beneath them felt wrong, as if they weren't standing on solid terrain anymore, but something alive. Then the ground moved. It rippled beneath their feet, pulsating like the flesh of some massive, unseen beast. The air filled with a deep, rhythmic sound, not a growl, not a roar, but breathing, something old, something massive, something watching them. Garen's mind raced. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a graveyard. "You were warned," the voice whispered again. Garen gritted his fangs. "What are you?" he roared into the comms. Silence. Then, finally, a response. "We were here before you. Before your kind, before the council, before the stars themselves. And yet you came, as they always do." Garen's blood ran cold. They had thought Earth was just another primitive world. But this planet, it wasn't just defended. It was alive, and it remembered. A warrior near Garen suddenly screamed. He turned just in time to see the soldier's body twisting, his exoskeleton warping, melting, as his form stretched into something unnatural. His limbs elongated, his mandibles cracked apart, his eyes turned completely black. Then, in a single, jerky motion, he stood up again. But it was no longer him. It turned its head toward Garen, and when it smiled, he knew. They had never been fighting humans. They had been fighting Earth itself. And Earth had already won. Goran staggered back, his warrior instincts screaming at him to run, to fight, to do something. But how did one fight a planet? How did one conquer something that became its enemy? The soldier who had just transformed, his former comrade, took a step forward, his movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. His mandibles twisted into something that shouldn't have been a smile, and his voice, when it came, was layered. A distortion of his original tone, mixed with others, many others. "You hear them, don't you?" The thing that had once been a warrior whispered. More screams erupted around them. The Zarkari forces, hardened killers who had conquered countless worlds, were being picked off one by one. Some were dragged into the shadows. Others simply changed. Their bodies twisted, their minds taken, their voices merging into the ever-growing chorus of whispers. Garen's mind raced. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of advanced human weapon. Psionics, mind warfare, hallucinations. It had to be, but the planet itself pulsed beneath his feet. The air thickened with unseen eyes. The sky itself seemed to darken despite the fires. No, this was no human trick. This was something older, something waiting. A sharp click echoed behind him. Garen spun, his plasma blade igniting in a flash of blue light. One of his warriors, a veteran, a survivor of 100 campaigns, stood before him, trembling. His rifle was raised, but not at an enemy. At him. "Overlord!" the soldier gasped, his breath ragged, his body shaking violently. I hear them inside." With a sudden, brutal movement, the warrior jammed the barrel of his rifle beneath his own jaw and pulled the trigger. A flash of green plasma, a sickening hiss. His body crumpled, and the whispers grew louder. Garen's breathing turned shallow. He had to regroup, had to do something. His eyes darted across the battlefield, searching for survivors. Most of his forces were already gone, taken, consumed, or worse. But a handful of warriors still clung to their training, forming a defensive perimeter around the wreckage of the unyielding Wrath. He sprinted toward them. "Fall back to the ship!" he roared. "We make our stand there!" The remaining warriors obeyed, retreating toward the shattered hull of their once mighty flagship. They weren't thinking about victory anymore, only survival. But as they reached the wreckage, a terrible realization settled over them. The ship was changing. Its metal hull, once a proud display of Zarkari engineering, was warping, twisting, pulsing like living flesh. Strange veins ran along its surface, dark and pulsing, as if the planet itself was consuming it. One of the warriors hesitated. "Overlord, the ship..." A wet tearing sound cut him off. Something emerged from the wreckage. It had no name, no true form. It was the ship. It was the battlefield. It was Earth, and it had no intention of letting them leave. Garen finally understood. They had been so arrogant. They had thought Earth was weak. But the reason no one had ever conquered this world wasn't because it lacked defenses. It was because it didn't need them. This planet did not surrender. This planet did not bow. This planet fed. And now the Zarkari would become part of it, forever. Garen's claws tightened around his plasma blade, but deep down, he knew. It wouldn't make a difference. Nothing would. This planet had already won. The thing emerging from the wreckage was unlike anything he had ever seen. A mass of shifting, writhing material, part metal, part flesh, part something else. The remains of the unyielding Wrath twisted into it, folding and reshaping like a ship being devoured from the inside. No, not devoured. Transformed. And then it opened its eyes, thousands of them. Black, empty voids staring in every direction at once. A terrible, crawling realization slithered down Garen's spine. The ship wasn't being consumed. It was becoming part of Earth. A low, sickening voice rumbled from the entity, not a voice in the way beings spoke. No sound, no vibration. It was something deeper, something that spoke inside him. "We remember you." The Zarkari warriors recoiled. One of them screamed, unleashing a wild barrage of plasma fire at the shifting horror. The bolts of energy struck the mass, burning holes in it, only for the wounds to breathe and close. And then, the warrior who fired the shots gasped. His plasma rifle melted in his hands. His armor tightened against his exoskeleton. He looked down. His body was fusing into itself. He tried to scream, but his mouth sealed shut. His limbs bent at impossible angles, his form curling inward, shrinking, until he was no longer a soldier at all, just a lump of something writhing, shifting, changing. Then he was gone. and the thing with 1,000 eyes laughed. Garen turned to his remaining warriors. "We're leaving, now!" "But Overlord—" "Now!" He activated the emergency beacon on his wrist. There were still Zarkari ships in orbit. He didn't know if they had received his distress signal, but he didn't care. He refused to die here. He refused to become part of whatever this was. The surviving Zarkari sprinted toward the edge of the battlefield, their massive forms cutting through the smoke and wreckage. The whispers followed them. The air pulled at them. "You were warned." One of the warriors suddenly vanished mid-stride, one moment running beside Garen, the next moment gone, as if he had never been there at all. No scream, no sound, just erasure. Garen didn't stop. He could see it now, the wreck of a landing craft half buried in the dirt. If they could get it airborne, just for a moment, they could escape. He reached it first, slamming his clawed hands against the hatch. "Get inside!" The surviving warriors clambered into the ship, their breathing ragged, their minds breaking. Garen followed last, slamming his fist against the control panel. The engines flickered, then sputtered, then died. A long, slow sigh filled the air around them. Not from a creature, not from a being, from Earth itself. The sky above darkened further, the stars vanishing one by one. And then something moved. Not in the wreckage, not in the shadows, but beneath the planet's surface, something ancient, something vast, something waking up. Garen gritted his fangs. He would not die here. With a roar, he ripped the emergency panel from the control console, exposing the raw wiring beneath. His claws sparked against it. The ship trembled. And, against all odds, the engines roared to life. The landing craft lurched into the air, shaking violently as it fought against the pull of the planet. The surviving warriors clung to whatever they could. The ground below rippled, twisting like a living thing, as if the very land itself was reaching for them. But they were already rising. Higher, higher! The smoke cleared, revealing the wreckage-strewn battlefield beneath them. And in the center of it, a shape stared up at them. The thing that had once been the unyielding wrath was no longer just a ship. It was something else now. Something watching. Something smiling. Garen refused to look at it any longer. He locked his gaze on the sky above, on the void, on the hope that if they could just get past the atmosphere. The ship's sensors flickered to life. A transmission crackled through. "This is the battleship Eternal Dominion in high orbit. Overlord Garen, do you copy?" Garen nearly collapsed from relief. "We copy. Immediate retrieval. Do not land—" "What happened down there?" the voice on the other end asked. "Our scanners detected no enemy activity, just static." Garen's mandibles clenched. How could he explain? How could he put into words the horror that had unfolded? "Do not attack this planet," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Do not return. Do not send scouts. Do not even look at it." Silence. Then, "Overlord?" Garen closed his eyes. "Burn the records. Mark this world as forbidden, and never speak of it again." The transmission cut. The landing craft broke through the atmosphere, escaping the grip of the planet below. Garen didn't look back. He never wanted to see Earth again. But Earth saw him. And it remembered. It always remembered, because Earth was not weak. Earth was not prey. Earth was something else entirely, and the galaxy would never understand why no one ever returned. Because the ones who did, they were never the same again. Even after escaping Earth's atmosphere, Garen could still feel it. The whispers had stopped, but their echoes lingered in his mind. The darkness of space should have been comforting, a return to the cold, uncaring void he had always known. But something about the stars felt wrong now. He had seen things no warrior should see, and Earth had seen him back. The landing craft drifted into the docking bay of the Eternal Dominion, one of the Zarkari Empire's most powerful warships. The surviving warriors, what little remained of them, stumbled out, their expressions hollow, their bodies trembling. They were the lucky ones. Some had not escaped. Some had changed. And some had simply ceased to be. Garen had been in wars before. He had seen warriors crushed, burned, torn apart. He had never seen an army unmade. The ship's commander, High Warlord Krivak, waited for him at the bay entrance. A towering Zarkari with obsidian-black exoskeleton plating, Krivak was a legend among their kind. He took one look at Garen and frowned. "You look like you crawled out of a grave." Garen's mandibles twitched. "That would have been preferable." Krivak's gaze flicked to the surviving warriors. "This is all that remains of your invasion force?" Garen nodded. "And it was never an invasion. It was an execution." Krivak's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Garen opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How did he describe what had happened? How did he explain that a planet had eaten his army? Instead, he simply said, "We need to leave." "Now?" Krivak folded his arms. "We don't flee from backwater planets. The invasion fleet is still en route. We need to—" "Call them back," Garen snapped, his voice shaking. "Do not let them set foot on that planet. Do not even let them orbit it." Krivak's mandibles twitched in irritation. "You're panicked. That is not the way of a warlord." Garen grabbed him by the armor, his claws digging into the plating. "I watched warriors dissolve. I watched our strongest fighters turn into things. I saw our ship become part of the planet itself. You don't understand, Krivak. We didn't find a defenseless world. We found something waiting for us." Krivak's patience wavered. His clawed hand shot up, gripping Garen's wrist. "Get a hold of yourself. You sound like a mad—" A low hum filled the air. Krivak froze. So did Garen. The sound wasn't coming from the ship's engines. It wasn't from the docking bay machinery. It was coming from inside them. One of the surviving warriors collapsed to his knees, his entire body shaking violently. His mandibles twitched. His eyes, once fierce and golden, turned completely black. And then he laughed, the same distorted, broken laughter that had haunted the comms. The air in the docking bay grew thick. The lights dimmed, not from a malfunction, but from something else. The warriors stepped back, their weapons raised. But Garen already knew they hadn't escaped Earth. Earth had come with them, and it was still hungry. The laughter sent a ripple of cold terror through the Zarkari warriors. It wasn't just coming from the soldier on his knees, it was spreading. The sound layered itself, as if 100 voices whispered beneath it, growing deeper, closer. Then the fallen warrior's body began to change. His exoskeleton cracked, splitting like dried leather. His limbs twitched, elongating slightly, his claws curling unnaturally. His breathing turned ragged, wet. And then he lifted his head. His golden eyes were gone. Only black voids remained. Garen's grip on Krivak tightened. "Do you believe me now?" Krivak was silent. The transformed warrior staggered to his feet, his posture wrong. He looked around the docking bay, tilting his head as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then he smiled. "It's still watching." Krivak drew his plasma rifle and fired. The shot hit the thing square in the chest, burning straight through its armor. It should have fallen. It should have died. But instead it laughed again. The hole in its chest moved, closing over as if the wound had never existed. The creature flexed its claws, looking down at its own body like a child inspecting a new toy. Then it took a step forward. "Contain it!" Krivak roared, shoving Garen back and aiming for another shot. The other warriors followed suit, their weapons flaring to life. Plasma bolts slammed into the thing's body, scorching its exoskeleton, but it did not fall. It grew, its form twisted, the black voids in its eyes expanding, spreading outward like cracks in reality itself. And then, the docking bay screamed. Not the warriors, not the creature, the ship itself. The walls groaned, metal warping and breathing. The floor beneath them pulsed. The very air shuddered, rippling like disturbed water. The eternal dominion was changing, becoming something else. "You brought it with you," the thing whispered. One of the warriors broke. He turned, sprinting toward the blast doors, toward escape. But before he could reach it, the door melted into flesh and opened an eye. The warrior's scream was cut short as the door swallowed him. Garen's mind reeled. This wasn't possible. They had escaped. They were in orbit, light years away from that cursed planet. But the truth was undeniable. They had never left Earth. Because Earth had never been just a planet. It was something else. And now it was spreading. The creature that had once been a Zarkari warrior let out a slow, satisfied breath. Then it turned its gaze to Garen. "You never should have come." Garen felt something inside him crack. This wasn't just an invasion gone wrong. This was an infection, and now it was in their fleet, in their empire, and soon it would be everywhere. Garen had never felt true hopelessness before. He had fought battles where the odds were against him, stood against enemies that outnumbered him 10 to 1, survived wars that had crushed entire civilizations. But this was something else. His claws trembled on the grip of his plasma blade. Not out of fear. He had accepted fear long ago. But because some deep, primal part of him knew. This fight had already been lost. The thing that had once been his warrior took another step forward. Its mandibles stretched in a grotesque mockery of a Zarkari expression. Its eyes, those empty voids, fixated on him. And then it spoke. "You think you escaped." The whispers came from inside his mind, crawling beneath his exoskeleton, slithering into every crack of his thoughts. "You brought us with you." Around him, the docking bay breathed. The walls swelled and contracted, the metal groaning as if becoming something organic. The ship was changing, becoming part of it. Krivak, still standing beside him, let out a slow exhale. "Overlord, tell me this is a nightmare." Garen didn't answer, because it wasn't. The transformed Zarkari warrior lunged, faster than he should have been, faster than anything should have been. Garen barely reacted in time. His plasma blade flared to life, swinging upward. The blade cut straight through the thing's torso, splitting it in half. For a fraction of a second, he felt relief. Then it laughed. The severed halves writhed, black tendrils slithering through the air, pulling themselves back together. The wound healed as if it had never been there at all. Krivak snarled. "Fall back, now!" The remaining warriors turned and ran. Not because they were cowards. Zarkari did not retreat. But this was not an enemy they could fight. This was not an enemy at all. This was a plague.